Yes.
Let's call the meeting to order. Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers for May 25th, 2017. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton. We have members of the public here. Do you wish to speak to an item that's not on the agenda or that's on the consent agenda? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
I'll take Manager Rognus. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have no correspondence to look at this evening, so we go to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda are approval of the minutes of May 11th, 2017, and approval of check registers, the general checking account, the surety account, and the 325 Blake Road checking account, and one additional item, which is 7.1, Resolution 17-037, authorization to apply for funding assistance through the Hennepin County Brownfield Gap Financing Program. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Rognus, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. On to reports. I've had the proverbial, what do they call it, quiet week in Lake Wobegon. No meetings to report on. But just a reminder that a week from tonight we have our tour with the CAC. The arrangements, I think, were sent to us in an email, but 5:30 there'll be a light meal, and then 6 o'clock we'll get on the bus. And a reminder, too, that there are two 50th anniversary events coming up on June 3rd and June 11th, and I certainly encourage managers to drop in and check those out. Manager Miller, PPC report. Planning and Polly.
We had continuing discussion of the budget tonight and a progress report, and it's an ongoing mission. So,
Thank you. The upcoming meeting and advance schedule is printed in the agenda. We are on to item 9.1, which is a public hearing for the acquisition of 3910 and 3940 Farm Hill Circle in the city of Minnetrista. Mr. Whisker.
Bear with me just 1 second. PowerPoint decided it didn't want to work.
Okay.
this is the first that our planning director hasn't been able to get the computer working.
I didn't plan ahead of this.
We all needed a moment to catch
Yeah, do you want me to help you with that?
Yeah.
It's not my fault, it's Microsoft.
Is there an on button?
Telling me that PowerPoint has not been activated on this computer.
And you're the guy who doesn't have an iPad. You just can't make fun of other people for that.
Apologies for that. Chair White, managers, tonight, as President White outlined, we're hosting a public hearing for the proposed partnership between Three Rivers Park District and Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to acquire property at 3910 and 3940 Farm Hill Circle for purposes of a potential clean water improvement to treat Halstead Bay on Lake Minnetonka. And before I start, I'll note that we've got the public hearing scheduled, and then immediately after the public hearing, given some of the timing constraints that I'll outline in the presentation, item 11.1 on the agenda has the board considering authorization to execute a cooperative agreement with Three Rivers Park District that would have us partnering on the acquisition. And And I'm sorry, President White, would you like to open the public hearing after the presentation?
Yes, I'll do it then.
Okay. So before we get started, I wanted to provide a little bit of context for the public hearing with regards to why Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is considering this potential acquisition. And the geography that's outlined on the map represents the 6 Mile or Halstead Bay subwatershed. So all of the lakes within this 27 square mile geography, which is on the westernmost orientation of Minnehaha Creek, Minnehaha Creek's watershed, flow downstream into Halstead Bay, which is on Lake Minnetonka and is the most degraded water body in the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Further upstream, there's approximately 14 lakes and about 12 miles of stream system with various levels of impairment. And given the level of degradation out here, along with the opportunity for partnerships and the developing landscape and land use pressures, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District has identified this particular area of its watershed as one of strategic focus for capital improvements over the next 10 years. We've been working in partnership with both Hennepin and Carver counties, Three Rivers Park District, Laketown Township, Waconia Township, the City of Victoria, St. Bonifacius, and Minnetrista over the last year to develop a regional systems plan for this area that identifies what the main water resource issues are in this geography, what are causing those issues, and finally what it is that we might do about those, the management strategies, as well as developing a funding plan. That planning process is coming to a close here in the next several months, and the systems plan for this geography will be incorporated into the Watershed District's comprehensive plan, which is planned for release for public review and comment in June. And so the opportunity that we're considering tonight fits in nicely. The main issue within the whole system is excessive nutrients, too much phosphorus in a lot of the surface waters, the lakes out here, and in particular Halstead Bay. Some of the main issues driving the excess nutrients are the presence of carp throughout the system, which feed on the bottom and stir up sediment and make the water cloudy or turbid, as well as wetlands that are prevalent throughout the system that are discharging phosphorus because they've been historically altered for farming or development or drainage. And so the overarching strategy for improving water quality in this area is managing the rough fish population or managing the carp population, restoring a lot of the wetlands on the landscape, and secondary strategy is as those implementation activities start to take effect, we look in certain water bodies to use alum dosing, which is a chemical water treatment process that settles out the dissolved phosphorus in the lakes. And that's a specific strategy that has been looked at by the Watershed District in the past, back in 2013, in partnership with the City of Minnetrista, which I'll summarize, for Halstead Bay, which has a significant amount of dissolved phosphorus, non-particulate, that's making the water quality in Halstead Bay poor. So a little bit about what's going on in Halstead Bay. It's reasonably complicated graphic, but the basics of it is that of the phosphorus, the nutrient that's causing a problem in Halstead Bay, approximately half of it is coming from upstream lakes, from Mud Lake and from Parley Lake. And here's a picture of Mud Lake down in the bottom left-hand corner of the map here. And Parley Lake is just upstream. And these two lakes are quite shallow, and the fish that are present in these lakes, the carp, stir up a lot of the sediment. They've, because of their feeding habits, taken out a lot of the plants that would normally be in a shallow lake that would stabilize the lake sediments. And that sediment makes its way downstream into 6 Mile Marsh here. And that's significant because in the marsh, all that sediment that's stirred up, which are particles, the particulate level of phosphorus, starts to settle out in the slow-moving water that travels through that big wetland system. And so the particulate that comes out of Mud Lake travels through the creek and settles out in the marsh, where it's then transformed. It undergoes a chemical transformation from particulate to dissolved phosphorus, which is much harder to treat. You can't use stormwater ponds or wetland systems to treat the dissolved phosphorus. So what you have is a pretty disproportionate impact of these lakes on Halstead Bay. And this is another graphic to just outline what's happening in that marsh area. So by the monitoring work that the district's science department does of the channel and Mud Lake and on the end of the marsh collecting water quality samples, we know that coming out of the Mud Lake system, there's about 1,800 pounds of the whole phosphorus budget that is in these particles in sediment. But then that goes into the marsh, this big box here, and a bunch of it settles out. And what happens is the marsh then releases from the sediment phosphorus that's then dissolved in the water column. It's not attached to any particles. So it's inside of the water, and then that travels downstream. And so here you'll see the particulate load coming out of the wetland is much lower, and your ortho, which is your dissolved phosphorus, skyrockets. And that's much harder to treat. You can't settle it out. And so the acquisition tonight is really around contemplating how do you manage the phosphorus that's transformed in the marsh. So in 2013, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District partnered with the city of Minnetrista and looked at the feasibility of constructing the equivalent of a water treatment facility that would essentially pull that water out of the creek system and then chemically treat the water to settle out all of that dissolved phosphorus that's inside of the water. And as that would happen, you develop a sludge material that would be piped to sanitary. So this is a pretty good parallel or analog to how we treat drinking water. We pump water out of the ground, we chemically treat it. There's a bunch of byproducts that settle out, and then that gets discharged to sanitary. It's the same basic concept. And so we knew at that time the ideal location for a system like this long term would be towards the end of the marsh where the creek starts to discharge into Halstead Bay, because then you're picking up as much of that dissolved phosphorus as possible. Now, long term, Three Rivers has been planning a trail crossing in this location, and because they're part of this regional partnership that we've been engaged in for the last year, knew that long-term the district was interested in exploring this water treatment facility option. And so within the last 45 to 60 days, as Three Rivers Park District secured a purchase agreement with the sellers of this property, the Kuchers, who are in the audience tonight, they approached the Watershed District to see if we would be interested in collaborating or partnering financially on the acquisition of these parcels and carving out a subdivision of the property to site a water treatment facility at some point in the future. We've discussed this with the board a couple times in committee. We presented at the board meeting on March 13th. We were instructed to keep moving this forward in partnership with Three Rivers and develop a term sheet for agreement and go talk to the city of Minnetrista about this, which I'll recap in a minute. So on the property, one of the first things that we had to do in this condensed time frame is just see if there would be enough land acreage in order to site a treatment facility, knowing that we don't have a design, we don't have the funding lined up necessarily, we haven't done community engagement in the neighborhood, that would come later. The massing that we've done shows us that we need approximately 2 acres. There'd be a series of buildings on the site, including these 5-foot tall clarifying tanks, those 2 big blue circles. And those are the big parts of the facility that might be located on the site. The water would essentially go into those where the chemicals are applied, and that's where the material would settle out. And then the byproduct or the sludge that would settle out from these tanks would be sent to sanitary down Kings Point Road. It would tie into the sanitary on Kings Point Road, And we've looked at, with the city of Minnetrista, locating that treated water discharge, that sludge disposal line that's here, co-aligning that in the city of Minnetrista's water main easement. So in terms of the Three Rivers Park District agreement, the basic terms were presented back in March to the board. We're instructed to keep working on it. There's a copy in the board packet for consideration under Resolution 17038. But I'll walk through the basics here. Essentially, Three Rivers has already executed a purchase agreement for a fixed amount. We've evaluated that appraisal and discussed that in closed session with the board, and the board seemed reasonably comfortable moving forward. With or without us, Three Rivers Park District has already executed the purchase agreement and lined up funds for the acquisition, and so they'll be proceeding without us. What's up for consideration is the execution of agreement that would have the district participating financially in place of some of the Metropolitan Council funds that would otherwise be used to have Three Rivers move forward. So Three Rivers, under the agreement, basically Three Rivers Park District is going to move forward in closing with the Kuchers, the seller. We're not involved in the closing. The property would be subdivided based on the exhibit that you've seen in the packet and the one that I just showed you, and I'll show you again in a minute. Our costs would be consistent with those outlined in the purchase agreement, the per square foot dollar cost. And then essentially the closing or the transfer of the subdivision to the district would occur for Minnehaha Creek in 2018. So the total purchase price for Three Rivers is $750,000, and based on the acreage and refining our numbers, our total costs are a little bit lower than what we discussed with the board previously at $435,000. We would require an easement to connect through the Three Rivers Park District parcel to connect to that existing city utility easement, and that's contemplated in the agreement as something that we'd work out and collaborate on the design of this facility and those easements later. And here is a picture of the exhibit that is attached to the agreement. This is essentially a tentative subdivision sketch that has been discussed with Three Rivers, accommodates the massing, and has been discussed and routed through the city and discussed with City Council. So to be clear, for the public, and I think the board's seen this before, is there's a lot of unknowns at this point. We're taking consideration of acquiring the property. The design and the funding and implementation of the facility would come later, and it's probably 3 to 5 years away in terms of time horizon. So the preliminary consideration is, are we comfortable making the acquisition and exploring this capital project over that 3 to 5 year time horizon? There'll be some costs that need to be adjusted from the 2013 feasibility study. We need to identify external sources of funding for the capital project. We'd need to discuss with our partners like the city long-term operation and maintenance of any of this kind of facility. And this is just a short list of due diligence aspects that would be fleshed out through the design process and public hearing and public engagement process later. And if for any of those reasons the board would opt to not move forward with the capital improvement, our principal contingency is that we have enough massing to constitute a buildable lot, and we would be able to resell or reposition that property for sale on the private market and recover our costs. So the timeline that we're operating in, given how and when this was presented to us by Three Rivers Park District, is that towards the middle part of June, they need to send their final cost allocation to Metropolitan Council for approval. So we need to finalize the subdivision exhibit by June 6th with support from Minnetrista. And leading up to June 15th, as outlined in the cooperative agreement, Three Rivers will be providing us with their title work, Alta survey, and a bunch of other documents for our due diligence. And leading up to June 15th, the watershed district can elect essentially at no cost to back out of the agreement and not proceed, because that will allow Three Rivers enough time to continue moving forward and reapportion the cost to Metropolitan Council. The final costs of the acquisition are dependent on that final subdivision sketch and the dollar per acre value associated with it. So the actual final cost and how we propose to finance that will be coming back for board review in June for discussion before closing. But we have discussed some of the options using the cash that we have available in our capital finance account, or another alternative is flexing the opportunity that we have through a master loan agreement with Hennepin County through a land conservation program. And we've looked at both of those and discussed those through the budgeting process last month. After those pieces are done, we'd be looking at closing and formal transfer of the property in January of 2018, which is when we would actually have to transfer the funds to Three Rivers Park District. So with that, that concludes my presentation for the public hearing, and I'm happy to take any questions.
First, I will open the public hearing and ask any member of the public, invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to this to come forward to a microphone. No one? Okay. Then I will close the public hearing. And we'll move on to 11.1, Resolution 17038, authorization to execute a land acquisition agreement. Were there questions based on the presentation before I call for a motion? Manager Miller?
Just one question. The size of this project, how much water does it treat by measure, I don't know what measurement daily or whatever, versus the Taft Lake plant in Richfield?
I feel like you've asked me that question before, and I was supposed to come back with a concrete answer, so I apologize. But there's 50% of the water quality impact to Halsted Bay is coming from upstream. It's about 1,700 pounds of dissolved phosphorus coming into the lake from those upstream areas, and this will treat somewhere between 70 and 80% of that amount. I'm not sure how that directly compares to Taft. The Taft Legion project treated approximately 1,500 acres, and this is picking up the water from a substantially larger area. I mean, it's a much larger level of load reduction. I don't have the numbers or dollar per unit available off the top of my head.
Is there a motion to approve Resolution 17038?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, and second by Manager Olson. Any further questions or discussion? Manager Olson?
I just wanted to make sure that the big picture that I'm understanding is accurate, okay? We are spending over the next 10 years, 15 years, up to $30 million in this Carver chain of lakes out there with our 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay project. And the mission is to clean up that water as it is. This plant has a finite lifespan. This treatment facility would last 20 years. And the plan is to run the plant to clean up the water going into Halstead's Bay in lieu of not having our big project finished. But when that big project is finished, we wouldn't need this plant anymore.
Manager Olson, managers, and members of the public, that's correct. The idea is that by putting in this more sort of pipe and pond infrastructure up front, that we can make immediate water quality improvements as soon as this facility goes in,
Okay.
knowing that the restoration of wetlands and management of fisheries is really ecosystem management and is going to take essentially 20 years. Not 20 years of solid implementation, but 20 years for those lakes to respond and start sending clean water downstream. So the idea is that by investing in this project in the short term, that the long-term work of the district to clean up the 27 square miles upstream, that these two projects will meet in the middle, and that as the upper watershed starts to deliver clean water to Halsted, rather than reinvesting and improving this facility at 20 years or 25 years, that you might be able to decommission it and rely on clean water that's coming out of the upstream lakes because they've been restored.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wesker. Other questions?
Just something that just occurred to me. Could we do improvement district in 6 Mile Creek to pay for this? I mean, in the 6 Mile Creek watershed?
We could if the board wanted to look at that.
Okay, I just want to know if it was available, all right.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Manager Becker opposed. Carries 6-1. Thank you
Good.
very much.
Could I ask Manager Becker?
It's a principle of being at the negotiating table and the development of the purchase agreement.
Okay.
It's a good project.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're on to 11.2, Resolution 17-039, authorization to distribute the CIP for annual review and comment. That's the capital improvement. Ms. Christopher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, managers. So this is something we've committed to do annually in our comprehensive plan, is to distribute the CIP to the cities and counties for 30-day review and comment. The draft CIP was reviewed by the managers at the April 27th PPC meeting. No substantive changes have been made since then. This is a 5-year CIP that we're showing, and as explained in the cover letter included in your packet, this table shows projects that are currently in development that have the potential to move forward and have a projected schedule and budget. We've also explained in the letter that these same cities and counties are about to receive our new comprehensive plan, which will include a 10-year CIP that will have a broader list of projects, including many that are opportunity driven and don't have a defined schedule and budget. So again, this list is just those that are kind of already in development. The letter also explains that the numbers in this table are not projected budgets, that they, our actual budgets are different due to the fact that projects are levied over multiple years, some are financed over multiple years, some, eventually don't come to fruition, so for a number of reasons, these are not budget numbers. Following the 30-day comment period, any comments received will be brought back to the board for consideration before adoption of the CIP. And with that, I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you. First, is there a motion to approve Resolution 17-039?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, questions for Ms. Christopher? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fieldseth, Resolution 17-036, authorization to request funds from the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council.
Thank you, President White, managers. Just pull up the presentation quick. So tonight we're bringing back for final approval to go ahead and apply for Lessard Sam's application to begin kind of phase 1 of 6 Mile Halsta Base habitat restoration through CART management. So since we last presented to you, we've talked with Manager Becker as well as Mike Malling at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who also has a lot of experience with successful applications to Lessard Sam's. We've got some very good recommendations, incorporating that into the application, which is still in draft form. We'll have a few more days next week to round that out before we have to submit. We want to come back to you today with kind of the remaining questions that we left you at last time, and those are really focusing around kind of the budget as far as how we're going to staff the management and equipment, how we frame these two things with as far as overhead in the application and making the most competitive grant as we can. So here's the final kind of proposed application budget for Lessard Sam's grant. As you can see, we took out the requested additional personnel out of the grant, and we utilized the existing staff, and that can be counted as district leverage and match. The big bulk of the request comes from basically contracts and capital equipment. Contracts is for removal of carp, for installing radio tags, running electricity for aeration units, that sort of thing. Capital equipment involves the aeration units themselves, a lot of the barriers and fish traps that would be put in. Other equipment and tools, I'll talk about that in a little bit as well, but we're proposing to put that as district leverage to reduce overhead in the grant ask and improve the competitiveness of the grant. And then there's $60,000 for supplies and materials, and this is all over 3 years. So the total grant ask would be $795,000, and you can see what we'd offer as leverage, which is about 45% of the grant ask, which certainly I think makes it very competitive. And then I just showing kind of the main selling point of this application to the Lessard Sams. We're restoring 2,488 acres of inlake habitat, for roughly $320 per acre of Lessard Sams money, which is pretty cheap. So I guess getting into just the remaining questions of personnel. Again, here's just kind of what we're estimating the staffing needs for these 3 years to complete the work. Be utilizing existing district staff, a little over half my time, about half the time of Jill Sweet, who's our AIS technician, and then that remaining kind of third of someone else's time or multiple people as they're available. We believe we can complete this work as well as our kind of baseline existing workload with the current field staff that we have, which involves there's a water quality technician position who is a contracted employee, which is up at the end of this year, and then through additional seasonal staff next year, picking up some of the routine monitoring so we can utilize other staff for this project. We don't need to make any decisions on that tonight. Just kind of wanted to let you know kind of where we're at with staffing needs for this project in addition to our other workload. Certainly there'll be the HR plan coming out soon as well as work plans. I think all this can be fleshed out further.
Manager Olson?
Your chart makes sense. I have a question on your definition of anticipated leverage.
Sure.
What are you saying?
Well, so that's the kind of the district value of staff, what we're paying, the amount of time we'd be spending on it based on like our salaries.
Okay, so you're leveraging our existing
Our time. Yep.
And dollars.
As a match.
As a match.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
I believe you caught the spirit of the board the last meeting that we went no additional staff, but you said you had one temporary person and you're going to keep them on full time for this?
Well, our current field staff, we have one of those field staff was on a 3-year contract, which is up at the end of this year, so a decision needs to be made on whether to keep that position filled. We think if we keep that position filled, then we can maintain the current workload that we have plus this project. If we don't maintain that position, we'd have to go back to prioritizing work and see what kind of drops off.
Well, that's kind of half the spirit of the board discussion. Every time we hire somebody temporarily, it becomes a permanent job. And I think this is an important project, and I know you've done a lot of good work on this, both the science and then the actual project. And I think it's going to be a great project, but I'd like to see it with no additional staff and no turning a temporary job into a permanent one.
Manager Olson?
Okay, now that AIS technician is only half of that person's time assigned to this, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so what else are they doing?
Running the existing AIS program, which involves Well, beyond the AS program, in the research and monitoring department, we're involved in E-grade biological monitoring. If the Long Lake carp assessment goes through, we're part of that. Trap netting and all that.
So
Early
he-
detection and
so-
rapid response.
So that technician isn't just leaving at the end of the 3rd year?
That's the AS technician is a full-time district position that, right,
Okay,
that's involved in a lot of district activities.
okay, so there's a, I see 3 people up there, sort of. Is there a 4th one for that technician? No, it's that person, right, who's already here. So that is all.
So there's the 2 AS positions, and then we're saying we need, to fill in with additional staff.
Right.
We need about another 0.3 FTE to
Okay.
complete the work.
Okay,
And I guess I was trying to make the point of, if we want to do this on top of our existing workload we've been doing, then it's going to require some staffing to do that,
okay, so you need a 1/3 of a person.
essentially.
But but we're keeping the position that was supposed to be temporary on the payroll.
I'd like to defer that, if I may. Manager Becker.
I'd like to understand what an FTE is, as you filled in this chart. An employee works 2,088 hours a year. That's a regular job. 60% of that is 1,200 and some odd hours. Those are spread over 3 years.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's approximately 400 hours for the .6 AIS program manager per year for 3 years. It's not 6/10 of a person for 3 years. Is that correct?
Not following the math completely.
Is this a 3-year plan or a 1-year?
So I guess it'd be 0.6 FTE each year. That total anticipated leverage is the total 3-year cost, if that makes sense.
So you will be spending 1,200 hours per year for 3 years.
Correct.
That's much bigger,
Yeah.
yeah, good catch.
It's a very
So it's a little over
labor-intensive
50,000 a year.
project.
And I wanted to respond, Manager Miller, and say that Mr. Fieldhoff did say, based on upcoming HR discussions or reports and based on budgeting, that's why it's called anticipated. So I think that discussion, the one you want to have, is
Yet
a
to
future
happen.
discussion.
Yeah.
And if I understand this correctly,
We'll never have it.
we don't know exactly how much time, staff time will go into it. We'll calculate that as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, this is estimated. I mean, a lot of these activities are new for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's a best estimate on what's going to take to complete the work.
Manager Olson.
So, to further interpret your comments, this is a statement of how much work is needed.
Correct.
And the future discussion will determine if it's all gonna be done by internal staff. How we're gonna do it. This is just stating, this is what,
I understand that, but we're committing to keeping contract employee to
Not-
full-time.
not true. We're committing that this is the amount of time it's gonna take to get the work done.
It's an estimate of Manager Loftus.
Do we have an idea of the right percentage of leverage or match that we need to be aiming for? And then question number 2 is there a reason why we couldn't or shouldn't put that 0.3 person, whether they're temporary and contracted versus maybe they're not staff, put that amount in the ask? Does that take us out of a desired percentage? What are those percentages?
Good questions. Manager, I'm sorry, Mr. Whisker, did you want to say something?
Not right now.
Okay. Mr.
So I
President?
have, I don't know if there's a sweet spot of how much overhead versus other work. Maybe Manager Becker may have some insight on that. I have seen other applications. There is personnel put in other applications, ranging from $10,000 on up. So I think it's fair to position it with some level, whereas proposing this to just have the optimum less overhead. But don't know if Manager Becker has any.
Manager
insight.
Becker?
The gold standard is 50%.
Which we're not near.
No,
We're at what, 70-30?
but you seldom see the gold standard. This is a reasonable match.
Yeah, so we're at about 45%, which is awfully close. You can see the request of 795,000 with the leverage.
Well, I think 50% of the total project cost is borne by the applicant, 50% by the fund.
Okay.
So do you believe that asking for that 43,000 when the district would be covering 220,000 in staffing would throw us out of the consideration?
All I can say is that I have witnessed members of the council publicly calculating the percentage match and using that in a declining manner to allocate funds.
As a scoring technique.
Yeah.
So we are saying that, perhaps I was mistaken, we really are pledging that we are going to put in that much staff time and cost.
So this is this is our estimate of the time it's going to take to complete the program, and that can all be used as leverage. So I'm not 100% sure on how leverage is tracked in the grant. I don't know if James, you know or not, but
I don't know, and I haven't spent enough time. Eric and I have talked a couple times about the kind of staffing consideration, and I'm sorry I had to step out, so I wasn't able to kind of catch the discussion leading up to this point. But at the previous meeting, Eric and Anna had outlined two basic options for personnel. One was put the personnel costs necessary to complete this program into the grant ask. And the other was to utilize existing R&M staff and prioritize AIS work. And there was some discussion, and I don't think there was sort of a unanimous direction, but the general consensus, going back and looking at it, was option 2. What Eric and I had talked about is trying to be transparent with the fact that if we move forward with this program and we are successful in getting the funding, that Eric and Jill's time, a substantial portion of Eric and Jill's time are going to be dedicated to running this program. And the then big question for the board is what to do with the work that falls off as they prioritize their time towards implementing the Lessard-Sams grant funding. And that could be decided through work planning and the HR plan. Either do less work or staff the work that you've already set up to do. It wasn't my understanding, and I don't want to sort of create confusion on the fly, that we were adding people and counting that as match. And I don't know that that's what we're doing. We're not saying we're going to hire a person and that's part of our match, but maybe I misunderstood.
no, it could be multiple people filling in that.
So for purposes of tonight's consideration, my understanding was that we can staff the funding that we're asking for with Eric and Jill's time, and the principal question is, as they move towards doing that work, they're leaving work behind. How are you going to program doing that work? Either you're not going to do it, or you're going to staff that differently, and those are considerations for work plan, budget, and the HR plan. But that tonight, you're essentially signaling if we get this money, this is where these staff people are going to be dedicated.
Manager Lopez?
I think the confusion was it sounded like a caveat added in there of you would need to keep on a previously expiring position would need to be kept on with this.
Manager Loftus.
I think what
Yeah, I
Manager
apologize
Miller
for the
heard.
confusion. I was just trying to relate to what it would take to maintain this program plus our current workload as an option.
Okay.
That can be decided through, the work plans.
You're all right with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Yeah, you don't want to hear this again, I don't suppose, but, we started this whole thing transferring the research from Wink, because it was going to save money. And that was, when it was costing, 120,000. Now we're up to $1 million on our, you know, we're doing a lot more, but, you know, several of these positions were temporary seasonal or temporary contract, and they become permanent, and it just seems like it grows and grows and grows, and we don't examine it on each increment, and that's all I'm trying to do.
Understood. Thank you. Any other questions? I have had a motion and second. No, I have not. Is there a motion to, Mr. Welch?
By my understanding, and obviously I wasn't there, the action that's necessary was taken at the last meeting, so you're not actually looking for action tonight? This is the authorization to apply for the Lessard Sand money, according to the minutes, was taken last meeting.
I blame legal. I'm just kidding. I think the board may have inadvertently moved for final action at last meeting, but it was staff's intent to have discussion at last meeting and progress it for final action this meeting. So we can handle that however you want according to Robert's rules. But our commitment was to come back with a refined grant application, which is still not where it needs to be. We'll finish it before Wednesday. We've gotten valuable comments from Manager Becker and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and others. But then to come back with some of the overhead questions more fleshed out before we finalized the board's commitment to send it to Lessard Sams. So I'll defer to the record, but that was staff's intent.
Well, we can approve it twice.
Or reaffirm.
President White, I do have a couple more slides.
Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Just want to address the other.
You got to vote now.
Yeah, it's
Right.
Go back.
Here are the 10 employees we're gonna need.
Well, in the spirit of clarity, equipment was the other issue. So we part of the application, there's $91,000 of leverage, district leverage. Part of that, the radio tape tracking equipment is stuff we already own. The trap nets and box net traps are things that can be funds available in 17. The trap nets are already part of the a contingent of a Long Lake carp assessment application that our partners on. And then the electrofishing boat and the backpack shocker would be part of the 2018 work plan, because that would be district leverage as we're proposing it. The alternative is to stick that back in the application, but then again, that increases your overhead. So I just want to give you just a quick look at what the 2018 work plan for carp management could be. So it would be at $78,000, like I was explaining, for equipment. And then kind of a contingency if the grant is not successful by this fall, we should have a really good idea. The alternative would be more of a phased implementation plan, which would involve addressing carp in the Pearson Marsh Wasserman Management Unit. So that would be some aeration units, carp area Wasserman outlets, some carp removal, and some supplies and maintenance. So if the grant is successful this fall, a lot of that extra could be taken out. But the $78,000 would need to remain if we're going to include that as leverage. And then just the timeline, again, is May 31st, the deadline to apply. And by this fall, we should have a pretty good idea on if we'd be successful.
Thank you. No, I'm not cutting you off. Okay.
The one other thing to add that we discussed with Manager Becker when he came in to provide us some guidance on the application, I wasn't sure if we covered this earlier, is once the application's made, we're planning on providing letters to the council members, as well as reaching out to a little bit of a strategic contact plan for face-to-face meetings. Utilizing Manager Becker's contacts and some of staff contacts to have one-on-one meetings before they start reviewing the applications to provide context for the district's work. And I don't know moving forward what level of planning will result out of those meetings, needing contact with Joel Carlson or other people as we move into next year.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker? Do you have a question, Manager Olson?
Yes, is that electrofishing boat available for weekends?
Yeah. That's a pretty nice boat. 70 grand.
Well, and
I
and
think
I
that'd be-
noticed in the budget that Eric had only included one backpack shocker in the board. I
That's
seem to
right.
think everybody wanted one.
That was 8, yeah. Is there any further discussion, any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Good work, Eric, thanks.
Anybody know if the district's ever received a LaSarge Sam's grant?
We tried it in 13, and we weren't successful. Interesting thing with that particular year, there were 5 proposals for AIS programs. They all ended up at the very bottom of the list.
I
We were the
remember
best
that
of
now.
5. The best of the losers.
Madam Chair, I
Manager
think
Becker?
the district gets money through Great River Greening or some of the other programs
Okay,
that bundle projects.
More indirect.
okay.
It's a good way to do it.
Yeah, thanks very much.
You know,
Manager Miller?
I was fishing, I don't know, it was last weekend or weekend before up north by Grand Rapids. And a big boat launch, I don't know what lake it's on. Cause I stayed at my, son's, hunting, camp. And, we went to another lake, so I don't know what lake it was. But maybe, 60 boats used the ramp that day. I mean, they were lined up on the highway. No one inspecting anything, you know. I looked like people were draining their live wells and stuff, but I wasn't sure. And, you know, there were a lot of boats that were $70,000 boats, you know, with, you know, but in big pickup trucks. I mean, this was pretty serious fishermen getting there at 6 o'clock in the morning on the opening day. But no one around checking anything. No one came out in the lake, checked anything. You know, it was just, I'm just wondering how serious the sportsmen take this invasive species issue, because these boats were coming from all over.
Well, the good news is they hadn't probably been fishing prior to that.
Opening day?
Many of them have been dry all winter.
Clean as they're gonna be.
Yep.
Well, that's good news. I feel better now.
Did you stop people?
Oh, I don't know. They're pretty serious fishermen.
Deputized
Yeah, I'm from the Mayock Creek.
So you could have
I'm-
used that
I'm-
electrofishing back. That would have slowed him down.
Yeah.
I think that's the reason why they tried to impact the design of the boats instead of educating the boaters, because it's a little more, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
It's just done.
But there's gonna be a lot of boats out there for a long
Right.
time.
Yeah, it's gonna take a while.
On to item 12.1, which is the MOD special meeting. We've had the benefit of having Perry Forster, manager from Riley Dry Bluff Creek, who's on the MOD board, here to speak to us. And the packet for the meeting was included in our board packet this evening. So I'd like an opportunity to get some guidance from the board as we delegates go up there and delegates and alternate to the meeting. And it might also be that if there are questions we could ask in advance, I would be happy to take those to Mr. Forster or someone else. So first of all, the budget. Any questions or thoughts about the budget?
We've got a new standard.
Seems like a big increase, but the impact on us is rather small. So,
One thing I noticed was a very picky, small item, but there's no line item for their per diems unless that's included under director meeting expenses, and maybe it is. Any other thoughts about the budget? Next then is the what they call the MOP, the Manual of Policy and Procedures. Any thoughts or questions there?
looks familiar.
Mhm. You know, I noticed in here, and I didn't look up whether this was a change, that there are 3 consecutive one-year terms for each officer. And I think officers have continued longer than that in the past. I wonder if this is some change, and it would be a good change probably. But as I say, I didn't look it up. Do
You're
you
saying the
know, Mr. Welch?
maximum? A maximum of 3 consecutive one-year terms?
In a row, yeah, you can come back later, I think, but 3 in a row.
I don't know why we support that. You know, when there's good and bad for turnover, but mostly it's good for staff when you got a lot of turnover because there's no continuity. And I think these bylaws were written with a specific person in mind to take the job and a specific person to and around a specific person's talents, because having a full-time executive director and a lobbyist for a small organization like this, when it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's for you delegates to figure out.
Manager Olson?
I tend to agree with that sentiment in that I would hate to think that the heart surgeon's 15 years is at the end of his term and now I have to go to a one-year experienced guy.
Yeah.
Because it's better to have a fresh start than it is to have experience.
Madam President, that is not a change.
Not a change? And yet they've had officers serve longer, I think.
But they can, there's just a provision for a rollover, you can succeed yourself for 2 more terms.
Right, 3 one-year terms, but then you
Right.
have to go off
But
and go
that's,
back.
you'd feel like they've stayed even longer than that.
Thought so, but I haven't done a formal study. Okay,
Me neither.
no change.
Mm-mm.
And then I noticed too that they have the dues for the associate members. The associate members are tied to Region 1, 2, or 3, but it doesn't really say how they're going to calculate their dues. So up to the board, I guess.
The associate members are public bodies also.
Well, they changed how it was written. There was an associate and an affiliate with uncertain definitions, and what they've said now is, the suggestion is that the board can accept associate members on its own action, and there's no definition of who can be an associate member.
Well, it seems to me then it's just a shakedown of the consultants if they will accept non-governmental people as members. So probably have a different formula for assessments and everything else.
Will they have voting privileges?
No.
No.
They do have, in the budget, I think they're anticipating some revenue from those memberships.
Thus the shakedown part.
There's also for a lot of medical organizations too.
Right, they could.
Oh, they're anticipating 2,500 for 2018 for associate membership income.
I believe one thought was the water management organizations, that they could include them in MOD that way, but there might be for consultants also.
Who
Anything
were the
else?
delegates?
Manager Olson and I, and
Okay.
Manager Rognus is the alternate.
All right.
And just,
Do you want to go?
they are,
No, no. I got a perfect record. I never attended anything.
Mr. Welch.
just briefly, that information to that MOD organization has been updated because what they sent out is not accurate anymore.
Oh, really?
As far as the delegates go,
Okay.
it had you and Pam Blix listed.
Oh, what's there? But there's
So
a form
it's
for
been
us to
updated.
fill out. Oh,
And
it is
that's been
updated.
communicated to,
I see what you're
just
saying.
checking.
That was
All right.
last fall. That was at the Christmas or the December
I
meeting.
think are you asking or stating?
No, I'm just wanting to confirm. My understanding had been that the delegates had been changed and were accurate, but the question was, what we got back from Maud in the packet seemed to have old information in it, so wanted to make sure Maud had updated, but,
So have
They
we
have our,
already?
they have our
Can-
current membership
yeah.
of our managers. I think that we need to complete the delegate
Delegate,
sure.
appointment form.
Thank you.
And that, I think they have a deadline of the 19th or something on that, so we'll get that. We have to make sure the secretary stays and signs that before doing anything else on the manual? If not, on to the bylaws. Any questions or thoughts there?
Nope.
No? Okay. That's all we need. Administrator's report, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. Just a few quick updates. A lot of staff focus and energy has been spent dedicated to budget planning in the last week or so. Also, the comprehensive plan. You've received some updates and emails for some review prior to having that being released for public review. So thank you for looking through those materials. I think the most recent one was the executive summary, which was a little more easy to digest than the thicker volume.
I thought that executive summary was a perfect synopsis of my experience on the board so far. Two years worth of attention to meetings to discuss all the things that sort of magically appeared in those sheets. It was very easy reading.
Good, that's good. Must be doing, at least we're on the same track then, so that's good. President White already mentioned a couple upcoming events. June 3rd, the bird watching event at Lowry Nature Center at Carver Park, and also June 11th is a Sunday Fun Day at Lake Nokomis in Minneapolis. We had discussed a little bit at the meeting prior to this, at the committee meeting of the Arden Park project in Edina, and I think was mentioned earlier in that meeting also that we have had some contact with a Star Tribune reporter that I believe the article will be in the Saturday paper, so that's one, just to kind of let you know that that's coming out soon for that. We've had kind of a series of articles in the Laker that have focused on the watershed district and our activity, and one in the recent last week's article had again watershed district focuses on slowing spread of invasives, and I showed this to Eric Fieldset today because it has a picture of him in waders next to a dock, and it says, "A man checks a dock for zebra mussels." They actually quote him, and he uses his name in the article, but not in the photo. And then lastly, the new and improved Lake Minnetonka map is currently at the printer, and those should be back soon and ready for distribution.
Thank you. Anything else? We are adjourned.
Lecture